I'm fine.
Good. Enjoy the music?
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Andrea Christina. Yeah, really, really good.
You've got Miss Aguilera on your iPod, I happen to know.
I do, actually. Well, my daughter does all the songs for the iPod.
Because you don't know how to work it.
I'm not very good with the technology. I'm not very good with any aspect of it.
Can I tell them the story about us sitting in Downing Street watching the football mute? And I said, why...
I think you're going to have to now, Michael. Why
are you watching it sound? He said, I don't know how to do it any other way, he said. You know? But anyway, let's talk about the musical career of Tony Blair.
This will be a brief conversation.
No, I mean, if you read the research on you, I mean, you were very committed at one point to being either an entrepreneur or to be a rock singer, in the manner of your great hero, Mick Jagger.
Yeah, they used to say that I mean, I had hair down to here at the time. It's one of the problems with my kids. If I get sort of angry with them, they produce the photograph. And they say, whatever else we have done, we have never looked like that. But yeah, no, I was really keen on it. I mean, I loved it. But to be honest, the talent was somewhat missing. Well, not that it mattered a great deal in those days, I have to say. But
the story about your band at university, you had a band called, you fronted a band called Ugly Rumour. And the story of your, if it's right, again in the book about you, of your debut performance it would put anybody off, wouldn't it?
Well, we had a drummer who was great but enthusiastic, and he kind of modelled himself on Keith Moon, if you remember, from The Who. So we went on stage and we went into the opening number, and he started really battering the drum kit, and the whole thing fell to bits. So anyway, it didn't make much difference, actually, to be absolutely honest. I just carried on singing. Which was worse, I think. But no, it was great. I think it's something everybody, when they're young, should go through that time of joining a band and going on stage.
Sure, it's great. But because at one point, I mean, I like that, what you did at university, to the acting that you did at your school, where you're called the best actor of your generation.
You're kidding.
He did a memorable Mark Antony.
Really?
Yes.
Why are you sounding so surprised?
No, I'm just thinking. I'm now thinking of shows at the Vic we could get you to come and do when you're done being Prime Minister.
Yeah, well...
But it does...
If you're looking for a job, you never know.
It does raise this interesting question, doesn't it? I mean, the obvious point, the link between actors and politicians. Many people have often remarked upon it. I mean, do you see a link? Do you see that... There's that degree of performing that you did when you were a kid. It's exactly what you're doing now on stage.
I mean, if you're doing Prime Minister's questions or you're making a big speech at a conference, I mean, there's an element of it where I suppose you're putting on a show and a performance, and I think some of the same things apply. I mean, I was just, saying to Kevin before we came on, how nervous do you get before you're about to go on stage and perform? And I think some of that same thing is there, and there's no point in going into politics unless you want to be in the public eye, and in that sense it's a stage, but yes. I mean, it's more than that, obviously, too, but yeah.
What about, I mean, if you take an example of somebody you both know well, Bill Clinton, he's always struck me as being like an actor, like a great actor. He has that presence. He walks on and people look at him. They're grabbed by his presence. You've witnessed this at first hand.
Yeah, he's the best politician as a politician I've ever come across. I mean, the one thing in politics you would never want to do is fight an election against Bill Clinton. And he's just, I mean, he's a friend of us both, and he's a really, really good guy. And was very, very helpful to me when I first came in and got the job, and was always giving good bits of advice. And
use your hands more, Tony.
He does a great imitation of it. When I just started, we went to a summit. I better not say the country because it wouldn't be very diplomatic. But we went to this summit, and sometimes what happens at these summits is they get the local people who do the fashion and all the rest of it. They try to get the leaders to wear something at the summit so it can be photographed and so on. I went into my hotel room just before the summit dinner, and there were 3 shirts laid out on the bed, ranging from ghastly through to unbelievably hideous. So I kind of looked at it, and I thought, well, put on the least worst, I put on the ghastly. So I go into the summit, and they're all milling around, and then suddenly in comes Bill Clinton, and he's wearing the unbelievably hideous one. So I go up to him and I say, Bill, I mean, that looks awful. And he says, yep. And I say, why? And he says, well, Tony, let me tell you something. You see, when the folks back home in America see me, they're going to say, look at our Mr. President. Someone's made him wear that shirt to be nice to all those people out there. But he said, when the folks back home in Britain see you in that shirt, they may just think you chose it. That's why he's good.
Yeah.
There's an entire political lesson in that, isn't there? Philosophy in it, yeah. But again, I mean, going back to your early days, there's no indication, was there, till later on in your life, that politics played any part in your life. Was there one moment, was there a book, was there a meeting with somebody which changed you, which changed your perspective?
There were people at university who got me into politics. I kind of got into religion and politics at the same time, in a way. And no, until the age of about 20, I really wasn't very interested in politics at all.
Well, religion was a way into politics?
Sort of, yes.
In what way?
Well, I just began to think, I suppose I began to think about the world differently. And there were, the great thing about university, sometimes you just get a whole lot of influences you've never come across before. And so I got interested in that at the same time as I became interested in politics. I mean, up to then, it would have been the usual interest you'd expect.
Does it still inform your view of politics and of the world?
Well, I think if you have a religious belief, it does, but it's probably best not to.
Well, it depends on your. I mean, some people have a belief in religion which is a comfort blanket, and others have it as a philosophy of life. I mean, is that what you have?
I suppose I would be
a Christian socialist, basically.
It's a long time since he used the word socialist about me, but it's. I think.
The Christian, you have no qualms with that.
In terms of the values and the philosophy you have, yeah, I guess that's right.
Yes.
And anyway, that's how I got interested in it. But my dad was very interested in politics. I mean, he was a conservative, in fact. I mean, he was an interesting. He had grown up. I mean, he was fostered. He grew up in a very poor part of Glasgow, and he was one of these people who almost went in the opposite direction to most during the war, because my dad joined the army as a private. He came out as an officer. He went in as a young communist and came out a conservative. So
the officer's mess changed him.
Well, I don't know, but it's he had a great influence on me, my father, even though our politics were very different.
Well, he was clearly a very remarkable man, as you say. I mean, fostered. I mean, very little education, and goes and gets a commission, and then comes out. I mean, took a university degree, did he not? Yeah. I mean, an extraordinary man, and almost it would have an extraordinary effect on your career. Did he ever vote for you?
He only voted Labour after I became Prime Minister. And he made it absolutely clear this was a matter of family, not anything else. But he was interesting because it was. He had a bigger influence on me politically, I think, sometimes than when I look back on it than I realised at the time, because he was very much a self-made person.
Yes. Yes. There's an interesting quote which you said about your dad, which I'd like to elaborate on. You said your father had an illness. Your father had a stroke. And you say your father's still alive, I should say, is he not? Yeah. But the quote was, my father's illness gave a direction to my life that wasn't there before. In what sense do you mean that?
Well, I was actually just 10 or 11 at the time, but my father had a very serious stroke, which meant that he was very successful. He was going to be a Conservative candidate, in fact, in a good Conservative seat, and he had a great chance to do well. He was a lawyer. He appeared on television at the time up in the northeast where we lived. But then it just ended, really, because he had a stroke. He had to learn to speak again. It was one of these strokes that affects his speech, and I remember he couldn't speak at all when he first came out of hospital. My mother really took him through 3-4 years, and you never recover absolutely and completely from that. And so he had to give up his political ambitions and a lot of his work too. But and when something like that happens, it's funny, as a child you grow up and you're just so used to everything being very stable, and suddenly this moment of complete instability comes into your life. And I think probably again the odd thing about if you become well known and people then ask you about your early life, you start to reflect in a way that you probably wouldn't otherwise. And when I look back, I think probably that was a very important moment when you
maturing.
Well, you suddenly think, life's not that easy, and bad things happen, and it gives you a certain spur.
And of course, too, your mum died when you were at university, and that would make you grow up very quickly, too, I would imagine, wouldn't it?
Yes, because you just don't ever expect a parent to die. I mean, that's just the way it is. But it's... No, I was very lucky. Look, I had a wonderful, happy childhood, and one of the things that stayed with me and has stayed with me all my life is the benefit of that and of the family and the love they can give.
Yes, it actually explains your love of family when you read. I mean, it was a very, very solid foundation background that you had. But I'm interested in the politics because you had this meteoric rise, didn't you? I mean, you were first of all up and coming, and then next thing you're in number 10. What part did Cherie, your wife, play in this? I mean, politically did she influence you? Did she have ambition for you, or maybe she had more ambition for herself than you did for yourself?
Yeah, it was. We both actually fought the 1983 election. No, I think what she's provided, and this is what again, I think it's difficult if you don't have that stable family and someone who's a partner and a friend as well as the person who, Mike, is my wife, and yeah, no, she's been fantastic all the way through. But it's a strange thing when when you come into politics and you've all this kind of pressure on your family. I think it either makes it a very strong unit or sometimes it can break it apart.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, you actually went to Downing Street, number 10, and you're the first incumbent to have a young family there for I don't know how long it might have been, probably ever. And that must have been, for them, very difficult indeed. You as Prime Minister can cope with that's your work, your office, your place of work. But for them, it must be like some imprisonment in many ways.
Yeah, but, you know, I find with the family, provided you're all close together, when you close the flat door at night, we don't actually live in number 10, we live 2 doors up above number 12, and when you go to a flat at night and you close the door, I mean, of course it's different in one sense, but you're still talking about the same things you'd expect us to talk about. You know, the kids getting their homework done,
yes.
What's happened today,
yes.
And I think if your family is very strong, then it works. And,
yes.
Well, touch wood, it has.
But going back to the time that you met Cherie, I mean, I knew your father-in-law, Tony Booth, very well. I used to go drinking with him in Manchester. And he was a former...
You and several others, yeah.
Me and the rest of Manchester.
Yeah. Not anymore, though. He doesn't touch a drop anymore.
No, he was a character.
And Michael, you haven't touched a drop since about 3:30, right?
This is true. I might start drinking on this show, actually. but I mean, what was your first meeting with him like? I mean, were you this also larger-than-life character?
Well, the thing I remember most about Tony in the first meeting is this is the first meeting actually just after we got married and we were in our house, and he comes into the house, and obviously I'd met him before, but I hadn't really sat down and had a proper chat with him, and he says, "Do you mind if I light a joint?" And I'm kind of thinking, this is my father-in-law. No, it should be the other way around, surely. So I said no, incidentally, just...
And when you go into number 10, I mean, you had this extraordinary political life early on where you were, one moment, they were sort of young and up and promising, and then into number 10 as a leader. Had you discussed before that? You obviously had. You'd anguished about it, no doubt, with your wife about what happens to somebody when they take up a leader and be as Prime Minister. And did you have any doubts at all about going for that office?
Well, what happened was it came upon me very suddenly because
yes.
John Smith, who was the previous leader of the Labour Party, died very suddenly. And so you basically then just had to make up your mind, because what happened was people immediately speculate on who's going to be the next leader, and within 24 hours you have to make up your mind. You're either going to go for it or not, and I did. So we never had much of a chance to find out, but it's the scariest thing that will ever happen to you if you're ever in a situation where you just overnight step into a different league of being well known. And I just remember for the first few nights after John died, just every morning waking up sort of with the back of my neck down, just thinking, what on earth? You know, suddenly your life, you know you're going to go for it because you just think, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to do it. But you know your whole of your life is going to change, and it's a very strange experience because you suddenly walk out the front door and there's all the cameras and TV people. And even though I'd been you know, quite well known before then. It was sort of well known in a small way, and then suddenly it's completely different.
And of course, there was at that time, too, a general mood of euphoria, wasn't there? That's, you know, I mean, this was you made Labour electable again, you got in, it was a new beginning, and...
No, people used to like me then.
Did you? But, I mean, was there a sense in which you were carried away by that euphoric moment?
Do you know something? No, because all the way through, I was thinking, yeah, this is all very well, but at some point, the job really begins. And, you know, so when you're running for office, I mean, I think it was Maria Cuomo, who's a famous American politician, that once said, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. And, you know, I remember the very first day after the election, when there was this great sort of euphoria, but you go into Downing Street, and this is Downing Street, it's behind Downing Street is a vast sort of set of offices and everything, but the front door, obviously the famous front door, you go in and there's a long corridor leading down to the cabinet room at the end. And the tradition is when the new Prime Minister comes in, all the staff line up on either side of the corridor and basically sort of clap you in. Now, we hadn't been in Downing Street, my lot, for 18 years. So everyone in there was kind of used to the other lot. So as I was going down, some of them, for very, very natural reasons, were kind of crying. So by the time I got to the end of the line, I felt really a bit of a heel about the whole thing.
The euphoria is over.
Yeah. But you go in, and I'll never forget, you actually go into the cabinet room, and there is the cabinet secretary who sits you down, and I'll never forget his first words to me, "Well, Prime Minister, what do you want to do then?" And suddenly you're thinking, yes, it's now begun.
Yes,
you know, and
yes.
the whole sense of you know, that moment, I mean, the euphoria drains away pretty quickly in the reality of knowing you've got to start taking decisions.
Has there been a point in your entire, is it 8 years, 9 years now, that you've actually felt, I wish I'd not walked through that door?
No.
There hasn't been?
No, there's been some really difficult moments and really
What
tough
have been
things
the
to
toughest
do.
ones?
The tough things are any decision in relation to conflict or war. And tough decisions sometimes, I mean, look, the job is a privilege, and that's the first thing to say. And the second thing to say is it's voluntary. So if you ever complain about it, you know, go and do something else. But the point about it is a decision-making job. And so you're always making decisions, and every day you will make 4 or 5, and maybe 1 or 2 of those is really important. And the trouble is about decisions is usually there's 2 points of view. So pretty quickly you realise the best you can hope for is to please some of the people some of the time, and certainly not all of the people all of the time. But that decision-making makes it tough, and sometimes, you know, yeah, of course, you do. It's a responsibility. But on the other hand, as I say, it's a privilege as well.
But sometimes, I mean, what you have to do is get used to sacking friends. I mean, people like Mandelson, like Blunkett. I mean, and that must be tough as well.
Yeah, it is, because you feel for them very much in that situation. And the trouble is, look, it's like everything else is like what you do, or indeed what you do. The fact is, when you live in the public eye, the mistakes you make and the crises that you have and the problems that you have are very, very visible. And, you know, one of the things, sometimes I had a group of kids in to see me in Parliament the other day after Prime Minister's questions, and they all come in, and you know, some of them sort of ask, well, what's it like being Prime Minister and so on. And you almost want to say to them, look, I was like you, I'm just a human being like you are, but the job is a different type of job because the decisions just come at you the whole time. And therefore, you know, after a time, because it's so visible and in the public eye, yeah, it can get very, very difficult, but you've got to harden yourself to it. And as I say, realise that out there, people are leading far tougher lives with just as great responsibilities within their own life. And, you know, as I say, don't complain about it.
But, I mean, you mentioned there, I mean, the Prime Minister has as a Commander-in-Chief, has the ultimate say about the nation going to war. And that's the most serious decision you can take in any event. I mean, you've been called a liar and a warmonger and all that sort of thing. What's your feeling, your attitude when that happens, when you read that? And also, too, when you read of casualties and people blame you for those casualties, I mean, that's a terrible, awful thing to live with. And I wondered how you coped with it.
Well, it is, but it's even more difficult for the people out on the front line doing the job.
Of course.
And that's what you have to remember. But
You sent them there.
Yeah, and that decision has to be taken and has to be lived with. And in the end, there is a judgment that, well, I think if you have faith about these things, then you realise that judgment is made by the people. And also by...
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
I mean, by the people, if you believe in God, it's made by God as well. And that judgment in the end has to be, you do your... When you're faced with a decision like that, and some of those decisions have been very, very difficult, as I say, most of all because there are people's lives, not just, this isn't a matter of a policy here or a thing there, but their lives, and in some case, their death. The only way you can take a decision like that is to try to do the right thing according to your conscience. And for the rest of it, you leave it, as I say, to the judgment that history will make.
So you pray to God when you make a decision like that?
Well, I don't want to go into...
No, but I mean, you said that.
Yeah,
you said that you'd be informed.
But of course, you struggle with your own conscience about it, because people's lives are affected. And it's one of these situations that I suppose very few people ever find themselves in doing. But in the end, you do what you think is the right thing. And sometimes, of course, these things are brutally controversial and a lot of people passionately disagree, as they did over Iraq, beyond any doubt at all. But in the end, I think if you do the job, you've got to be prepared to take the decisions of the job. And in the end, you've got to live with those decisions and live with your own conscience in them.
What about, again, the other thing that, I mean, you were talking there about the pressures of the job before we talked about all that. And it seems to me, from the outside looking in, that both the job of the President and the job of Prime Minister are, in fact, impossible jobs nowadays. Just because if you look at, say, take one, for instance, the media. Just take the way the media operates now. Take the way that 24-hour incessant news, bang, bang, bang. There's no time for reflection. There's no time for... I remember saying to you when I talked to you before that we were talking about how the Prime Minister dealt with things, and you were saying that Gladstone used to answer his own mail. He used to write handwritten letters. Yeah. Now you get, 10,000 letters a week. But, I mean, it's that extraordinary difference where you don't have time to think often. Yeah,
I think that the big change in modern politics, like in other things, is your 24/7 media.
Yes.
Just because it's very competitive and it's quite strong from time to time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's it's the way it is. It's like it's just. I think probably living with the media is one of the toughest parts of the job now. But it's there. You've got to do it.
Yes. It won't change.
Yeah. No, it's not going to change. And
it might get worse.
Huh? No, I mean, I sometimes say to you, I mean, I sometimes, when I'm trying to describe it, I've got to choose my words carefully here, but it's kind of like sharing an apartment with someone who's somewhat deranged, really.
That was careful, wasn't it?
Yeah.